Hi, I'm Chris, and in June 2024 I decided to do a solo road trip down to Disneyland Paris in my TentBox roof tent. The trip would take me down to Dover, across the channel, down to my campsite just outside of Paris, heading into Disneyland the next day. Now there's a lot to cover, both TentBox and Disney, so instead of making one long video, I've decided to split my trip into different videos. The first video, part 1, will focus on the journey itself in my TentBox. I'll talk about the planning, the logistics, how I got there, where I eventually decided to stop, and what it was like traveling on the road into France in my TentBox. This way, if you have a TentBox or a camper van and you fancy planning a similar trip yourself, the first video, part 1, is going to focus more on the logistics of the trip and will help you with that side of things. Part 2, this video, will focus entirely on my day at Disneyland Paris. That way, for those of you who are watching who don't have a TentBox and have no interest in going camping, this will appeal to you as it's just going to cover the Disneyland parks and what my experience was like being there. In this video, I'll have a good wander around both parks. I'll cover the rides, the attractions, along with some of the food options that I chose, as well as both the weird and wonderful people that I met while I was there. So without further delay, here's my day at Disneyland Paris.
So I am here at Disneyland Paris, and I've arrived actually a little bit early. My bus was super early this morning from the campsite, so brought me straight here, so nice and easy, which was not so much a worry, but nice and comforting to say the least for those of you if you're thinking about stopping there and coming here. Really, really good. So yeah, I've arrived a little bit early. I've just been trying to decide at the moment whether to go into Walt Disney Studios first or the Disneyland Park first. I think I'm probably going to do Walt Disney Studios and have a good look around there, but yeah, I thought the weather would possibly put people off today, but as you can see, it's nice and busy behind me, so definitely not a problem for people with the weather. So yeah, I'm going to head into Walt Disney Studios, have a good look around, and yeah, should be a really good day.
As I made my way over to the Walt Disney Studios park entrance, I actually met a lovely family who were visiting from the UK. Their 2 young boys took an interest in my filming and I had a good chat with them, and if you do end up finding this video on my channel, it was lovely meeting you all and I hope you all had a fantastic trip. Now at the time of me visiting the Walt Disney Studios, they were doing a lot of building work. There's quite a big refresh going on inside the park, which is why you can see all the boards up which are blocking the building work off from public view. The refresh is much needed, and they had some artist impressions at the entrance giving us an idea of what to expect in the future, and I am looking forward to visiting the park again at some point once the building work has been finished. First up, since the queues were short, I decided to go on the Hollywood Tower of Terror. Even though this ride has been around for years, it's always a favourite and it never fails to bring back the memories and nostalgia every time I visit. I just love the theming of the ride and the whole build up through the hotel, and the ride itself is always a good thrill. After the ride had finished, I made my way through the shop, having a look at some of the merchandise before heading outside.
So next up, I'm going to head into Avengers Campus.
Now, as a big Marvel fan, Avengers Campus was something that I was really looking forward to exploring. I've been to the Marvel part of Universal Studios in Florida before, which is amazing by the way, but I heard such good things about Avengers Campus and couldn't wait to explore it. The 2 main rides in Avengers Campus are Avengers Assemble Flight Force, along with a ride called Web, which is a ride based around Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and the story behind it is all to do with Tony Stark's technology. First up, I headed to the Avengers Flight Force. Being a single rider, I walked straight onto the single rider queue, which took 5 minutes, so I didn't need to use my Premier Access Pass on this occasion. The Avengers Flight Force ride used to be the Aerosmith Rock and Roller Coaster, but it's had a full reskin and a full refresh to bring it up to date and in line with the Avengers theming. The general gist is that you're on a journey and in a battle with Iron Man and Captain Marvel. When I went on the Rock and Roller Coaster last December in Orlando, I remember thinking how uncomfortable that ride was when I got off it, but the Flight Force was much more enjoyable. It still had the speed of the Rock and Roller Coaster, but the theming of the ride itself reminded me a lot of the Guardians of the Galaxy ride at Epcot, which I loved. A thumbs up from me for Flight Force. Next up was Spider-Man Web. I'd heard such good things about this ride and was adamant that I wasn't going to miss it. It was a 50-minute wait for the normal queue when I arrived, so I decided to use my Premier Access Pass for this one and take advantage of the 5-minute queue time. Once inside, there's some very heavy theming in the waiting areas. This is one thing I've always felt Disney do very well, but I noticed it more on my last visit to Disney World in December last year. The experience factor before even stepping on the rides these days has improved drastically compared to what I remember it being when I was younger. It's not a simple case of going and stepping on a ride anymore. There's a lot more theme building and storytelling before you even get on the ride, and I love this. The ride itself was an absolute blast. I found it similar to the Toy Story Mania ride at Hollywood Studios in Orlando, where you're spinning around and interacting with a screen in front of you, but in this one you're using your wrist to fire webs at the screen. I will also say that if you're going on this ride and putting in maximum effort, it will definitely count as your cardio for the day. I was absolutely shattered when I came off this ride, but at the same time I did give it 100%. Before leaving Avengers Campus, I had a look around some of the shops and had a look at some of the food options too. At this point, I left Avengers Campus and moved over to the World of Pixar area. I was firstly greeted by Radiator Springs, featuring Lightning McQueen, Mater and some of the finer details of the film. Now, Cars is one of my favourite Pixar movies. I appreciate it's not one of the best ones that's ever been, but I feel it's completely underrated and the characters are absolutely fantastic. I genuinely love the whole Cars experience. Now, that wasn't the only highlight, because behind me was the Crush Coaster, and this was a ride that I've been hearing so much about. For those of you who don't know, the Crush Coaster is themed around the Finding Nemo movie, and the Crush Coaster has been getting rave reviews online. There was only one problem, that the queue time was absolutely huge, as was the single rider queue. This is where the Premier Access Fast Pass comes into play. Before even stepping foot on the ride itself, a highlight of the whole day for me was the final part of the queue just before stepping on the ride. Once you get inside, there's a fantastic area that's themed as a harbour. It's got a shack, various different props as well as art on the walls, but the highlight for me was the 2 seagulls sitting on top of the shack. There's always been something I found hilarious about the mine seagulls ever since I saw Finding Nemo, and it was a joy to stand there and queue with them chirping away. Now came the ride itself. I could only record a small part of the ride as I didn't want to lose my phone, but wow, what a great ride. You sit back to back in 2s in a turtle shell, and essentially the premise is that you're riding with the slipstream in the ocean current with the turtles. It's such a cool ride. It reminded me a lot of the mechanics of the Guardians of the Galaxy ride at Epcot and how it spun you around in the carriage while moving along the track. It's smooth, it's slick, and it's a great showcase of a modern day ride.
So I've just got off Crush's Coaster. What a fantastic ride that is. Highly recommended and definitely worth the wait if you decide to queue.
Next up, I headed to the Ratatouille ride. Still located in the world of Pixar, the Ratatouille ride has a beautiful area located outside. There's a restaurant there, and as you walk down to the square where the fountain is, you've got various different street food stall options on your left hand side. The different street food huts serve various different dishes from throughout Germany and Europe. After scoping out the food options, I decided to go with a creamy potato dish called tartiflette. It was really tasty, and while the portion sizes weren't huge, for €7 it was quite filling and certainly kept me going for a little while before I needed something else to eat. After I'd eaten, it was time for Ratatouille. Even though I had my Fast Pass, the single rider queue was only 5 minutes, so I decided to save my Fast Pass for later in the day if I came back again later and it was busier. Now, the Ratatouille movie is another one of my favourite Pixar movies, and I recently managed to go on the ride for the first time in Orlando last December. The big difference between the version at Epcot and the version at Disneyland Paris is that the Paris version of the ride is in 2D, whereas the Epcot version is 3D and requires you to wear 3D glasses. So for that reason, I much preferred the Paris version.
What are you doing?
It was fun, it was fast paced, it was highly immersive, and there's a super cool scare moment in the middle of the ride, but it was so much fun and ends on such a positive note.
Hey, thanks for coming, everyone. Vous serez toujours les bienvenus chez Rémi. À bientôt et bon appétit. Mio? Au revoir.
After coming off the ride, I decided to head into the shop to have a look through some of the Ratatouille merchandise that was on offer. After finishing up in the merch store, I decided it was time for me to leave Walt Disney Studios and head towards the Disneyland park.
So that's me done in Walt Disney Studios. I've been here for about 3.5 hours. I got in at 9:30 this morning. It's now 1 o'clock. So I'm about to head over into Disneyland Park. I've done most of the big hitters this morning. I have done Tower of Terror, Spider-Man Web, Avengers, Crush Roller Coaster. So I've done pretty much most of the big rides. I don't think I'm completely done in this park. I think I will pop back later on this afternoon or maybe into the evening. But for now, I just feel like I'm going to head over to Disneyland, slight change of pace, and I'll see what's going on over there.
Once I'd made my way into the Disneyland park, I took a slow stroll down Main Street. With my fast pass, I was in no rush to get to any of the rides, so I took my time to stroll through the shops and soak up the atmosphere in front of the castle. After doing a quick FaceTime call with my wife, I headed to Adventureland for my first ride, Pirates of the Caribbean. Now this ride has been a favourite of mine since I was a kid, and I have so many good memories and it's filled with so much nostalgia for me. The queue time was around 40 minutes when I arrived, so I decided to use my Premier Access Pass on this one to skip the queue.
La ferme, Poulain. Qui veut des perles et des diamants? Montre-leur la marchandise.
Rascals and scoundrels, villains and knaves, think up me, hearty show ho. The devils and blacks, you really bad eggs, think up me, hearty show ho.
While I appreciate there are better rides out there, this is one of the highlights of the trip for me and I thoroughly enjoyed it. On the other hand, I'm not entirely sure that I can pull off a pirate hat with my beard. Next up was Discoveryland, and my first ride was the Star Tours ride. Now I've done this ride so many times in the past, to the point where I nearly didn't go on the ride. But with a 5-minute queue time, I thought to myself, what have I got to lose? And I'm so pleased that I did go on. Everything about the ride was pretty much exactly the same as I remembered it, but with one big exception. And that's the journey of the actual ride itself. What you see on the screen while you're on the ride has had a refresh to become more updated for the Ahsoka TV series on Disney+. I'm so glad I didn't know this beforehand, as it was a genuinely nice surprise. My plan after Star Tours was to head back to Main Street to get something else to eat, but Buzz Lightyear Laser Blast was just too good to pass up. I love this ride. I love the Toy Story theming with Buzz and the aliens. It's all just fantastic and it's always a great time. There was a queue time of 60 minutes when I arrived, so I used my Premier Access Pass, which took that down to 5 minutes.
Yes, we will return, sir, to the store. It's a bad toy.
Mission accomplished, Space Rangers. It's been an honor serving you.
Next up, it was time to find some scran. When I was in Disney World in Florida last December, it was on my to-do list to get a hot dog and fries while I was there. Unfortunately, the evening when I planned on getting a hot dog and fries, I actually came down really ill with a virus, and I spent the best part of the following week laid up in the villa and hotel rooms because I literally couldn't move. So I didn't get my hot dog and fries on that occasion. So there was only one place I was going to be heading, and that was for Casey's Corner for a hot dog and fries, and I'm pleased to say it was everything that I'd hoped it would be. Not because it's the best hot dog I've ever had, of course it's not, but it was a hot dog inside Disneyland, and that's exactly what I was after. While I was busy stuffing my little fat face with hot dog and chips, I'd seen a few people walking past with some really nice looking desserts, which I managed to trace to a shop called the Bake Shop. Inside there were shelves of these little small desserts, one of which was this banging cheesecake called a Golden Gate cheesecake. Now the hot dog might have been adequate, but the Golden Gate cheesecake was absolutely spot on and I'd highly recommend it. Just as I was starting to eat my cheesecake, the parade began. I always enjoy a good parade and have done in the past since I was younger, and this one wasn't too long. It was short, it was sweet, and didn't drag on too long. That was a good thing, because by this point I was itching to go on another ride, and my next stop was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril. I didn't use my Premier Access Pass for this one, as the single rider queue was only 5 to 10 minutes, so effectively the same thing. Without underselling it, this ride is essentially a big fancy mousetrap that's vaguely themed around the Indiana Jones setting. I felt this ride was feeling its age a little bit compared to some of the modern rides, but it was still fun nonetheless, with some nice little twists and turns to get the adrenaline pumping once more. Next up, it was time for Big Thunder Mountain. Now I love this ride. Again, it's one of the staples as a kid when I used to go to Disney World in Florida. The queue time when I arrived was 110 minutes, so I whipped out my Premier Access Pass, which took the queue time down to 10 minutes. Now this is the kind of thing where the Premier Access Pass comes in handy. It's a simple exchange of money for time saved. I didn't want to stand in queues all day if I had a choice, so for me the Premier Access Pass was worth every penny, but I appreciate that I just had to buy one pass and not 2, 3, 4 or 5 passes, and I could understand in that situation how the money could start to add up. Now at this point of the day, the Premier Access Pass had so far saved me 45 minutes in the web queue, 2 hours in the Crush queue, 35 minutes in the Pirate queue, 55 minutes on the Buzz Lightyear queue, and 100 minutes on the Big Thunder Mountain queue. It's not even 5 PM and so far that's saved me 355 minutes standing in the queues, which is basically nearly 6 hours of queuing that I've actually not done by having the Premier Access Pass. Now like I said before, it's an exchange of money versus time, and for me, instead of standing in the queues all day, I was able to go off, relax, enjoy the parks, and just then go back and get on the rides quicker. Again, it's a simple question of money versus time, and like I said before, I appreciate that the money can add up, but if you feel it's good value for money and a good exchange of your time, then it's worth going for the Premier Access Pass, if you can afford it. After Big Thunder Mountain, my plan from here was to go back to Discoveryland to go on the Star Wars Hyperspace Mountain, but when I got there I found out that it was actually closed on the day that I was there. I couldn't tell you if that was temporary or not, but I simply couldn't go on the ride while I was there. At this point, people were starting to gather and make their way for the big parade. I wasn't really interested in seeing the big parade, so I decided to have another go on Pirates of the Caribbean, which this time the queue time was only 5 minutes, so I pretty much just walked on the ride. After this, everyone was still trying to queue up for the parade, so I grabbed a little ice cream and made my way back to Walt Disney Studios. I figured if the Pirates of the Caribbean ride was quieter because people were queuing for the parade, then the Crush Coaster might be quieter as well. So I decided to go back to the Crush Coaster, and sure enough, the queue time was only 40 minutes instead of 2 hours like it was earlier. I'd already used my Fast Pass, so I decided to queue again for 40 minutes because I didn't feel that that was too long. By the time I got off my second run on the Crush Coaster, the rain was coming down, so I popped up my brolly and headed back to Paris to go on the Ratatouille ride one more time.
Une à point, une bleue et une saignante. Oui, petit chef. Il va aussi me falloir rapidement 4 ratatouilles pour la carte.
By this point, it was 8:30 PM, and after a long drive down to Paris and an early start on that morning, I was starting to feel a little bit tired. I'd originally intended to stop for the whole day and catch the fireworks on the evening, but as I made my way out of Walt Disney Studios and back towards the Disneyland park, it became clear that the tiredness was getting the best of me. I decided at this point to have a final wander around the Walt Disney store before ultimately deciding to call it a day.
So 12 hours at Euro Disney, and I think I'm pretty much set to call that a wrap. I've done 2 parks today and I've had such a blast. I've taken advantage of my Premier Access Pass and the single rider queues. I've done so many rides. I particularly enjoyed Crush Coaster. I thought that was fantastic. And actually one that caught me by surprise was Star Tours, the fact that that had a bit of a refresh and a rehash. I enjoyed all the staples, Pirates of the Caribbean, Big Thunder Mountain, Indiana Jones. I loved every single one of them. And I've even managed to do some rides twice. I did Crush Coaster twice, Ratatouille, Avengers. I didn't manage to do Spider-Man again, but I did really enjoy that. That's definitely a cardio workout for those of you who are a little bit unfit. And yeah, I've just had a blast and I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, it's definitely given me a taster to want to go back to Disney World in Florida again. And then the only job I need to do there is convincing the wife to come with me. Stranger things have happened, but she didn't want to come on this trip, so we'll see. But no, I hope you've enjoyed watching, and as always, if you're new to the channel, please do give me a little subscribe, and do remember to like this video if you've enjoyed my content. I've got a lot more on the way, not just for Disney, but also for TentBox as well, and more in terms of trying to bring the two together, so fingers crossed I might be able to do that.
So that's it, a bearded man's day at Disneyland Paris. I hope you've enjoyed watching my video, and if you have, be sure to check out the other videos on my channel. Remember, if you're thinking about doing this trip in a tent box or a camper van or staying on a campsite, be sure to check out part 1 of this video series, which I'll put a link to at the end of this video. I appreciate this probably hasn't been your traditional Disney blog, and quite honestly, that was my intention. I have no interest in becoming a Disney blogger. My travel is far too varied for that. My goal is to simply share my adventures with you, and by doing so hope to inspire you to make some trips of your own in the future. It's my hope that you found this video both exciting and helpful, and fingers crossed I'll see you on the road at some point in the future. Take it easy, and I'll catch you in the next one.